Our speaker for today really doesn't need any introduction, but in order to be formal about it, I'm going to go ahead and say a few words about him.
No.
He graduated from Franklin High School in 1971. That makes him a hometown boy. Went on to the Naval Academy. Graduated in 1975 with a Bachelor of Electrical Engineering and went into the nuclear program and wound up in submarines for 25 years. Now that's being underwater a long time. He served on 5 submarines, starting out on one of them as a division officer and wound up on the last one as commanding officer of it. That's quite a job in the submarines, because you're supposed to know at least 2 jobs. To handle 2 jobs at one time on a submarine is quite a job. The captain only had to handle the executive officer though. But he made it home. Got back into the States. He went on while he was on the last ship, was the Key West commanding officer. He went into, I think he got a desk job is what it amounts to. He served a deployment in the Med and in the Persian Gulf. He learned so much about that being on the staff duty that he come back and was commander of the subforce Atlantic, where he was instrumental in improving the sub-integration with cruiser battle groups and special warfare teams. In 1997 to 99, he was Chief of Staff at Commander Submarine Eastern Atlantic, and then went on to assume command of the Trident training facility down at Kings Bay, Georgia. He returned home, retired in 2002, started teaching school and coaching here in Macon County, and then he got into politics and was elected on the county commission in 2008. I think all of you know who I'm talking about. Captain Bobby Kuppers.
All right, Bobby!
Well, thank you, Bobby, and thanks to all of you for joining us here on this very special day. Am I okay there in the back? Because I can usually drive one of these things halfway to Murphy. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it. When I have to give a speech, I get real nervous, as you might have figured out by now, but usually what I do is I'll get up and I'll walk out on my front porch and I'll look at the mountains and I'll see what the mountains have to tell me. Look around you. What are the mountains are telling you right now? What a glorious day. What a glorious, glorious day. And I hope to do it justice. I don't know about you, but I'm tremendously thankful to be a part of this wonderful celebration and to live in a community that honors the service of its veterans as much as this one does. And as an elected official of that community, let me say to all the veterans, particularly the ones here in the front, but to all of you back there, thank you for your service. Macon County salutes you. Now, Joe, I learned a couple other things this morning. See, Joe knows it's the first time I made a speech, he was running for class president. He lost. But no, he won. But I learned a couple things this morning. When I was in Naval Academy, they gave us a public speaking course. I don't know why, but they did. And I was scared to death to go in and do that. And a senior, we called them firsties at the time, called me and said, "Son, don't need to worry about it. All you got to do is tell a really funny joke right at the beginning. Once they start laughing, talk real fast, they'll never know it was a bad speech." I don't have any jokes this morning, I'm sorry. I learned something else, Joe. I'm very embarrassed. I see all my comrades out here, a lot of them wearing their old uniforms, and I want you to know that I was going to do that. And I found out that if you put your uniform in a plastic bag for 5 years, the dadgum thing shrinks. So this is the best I can do, I'm sorry. Veterans Day in America, as you know, began as Armistice Day, a celebration of the end of World War I. It was observed at the 11th hour on the 11th day of the 11th month to remember the end of the war to end all wars. Over the years, though, Armistice Day in America evolved into what we now celebrate as Veterans Day, a day when we honor the service of all American veterans. So somewhere along the line, we changed a celebration of a specific historical event to something completely different. It became the celebration of heroes and everyday people, of veterans. During this evolutionary process, we had to decide a couple of things. Who would we honor? How would we honor them? And why would we honor them? With your indulgence, I'd like to take you on my trip to answer these questions, if for no other reason than to remind us ourselves of the obvious answers. So who do we choose to honor today? Who do we consider veterans? While attempting to answer these questions, I came up with a lot of sources. You can find anything you want on the internet. It's amazing. One source said a veteran is a person who served their country in a war. That's a very comfortable definition, folks. Many of you here today fit that definition. It's easy to relate to. It's easy to be indebted to those heroes who risked their lives fighting in our country's wars. And there are a lot of you today that fit that definition. Even though you're too modest to ever call yourselves heroes, you most assuredly are. Still, that definition was a little restrictive for me, so I kept looking. I found another one. And it said, a veteran is anyone who served in the military at all. And I like that one. I like that one because that would, of course, include my own service, but it would include the sailors, soldiers, and airmen who willingly and unselfishly left their families to deploy in times of peace, who left their families to deploy in times of Cold War to protect the peace. These men and women wouldn't claim the title of hero either, but they would certainly welcome the title of veteran. Still, it seemed that a very important segment of the veterans world was still being ignored. Because I'll tell you, it's difficult for me to tell my wife and kids that they didn't sacrifice as much as I did during 25 years of submarine service. Yeah, I know they weren't the ones buzzing around at 800 feet in a 360-foot-long sealed tube, nor were they facing the dangers that the soldiers, sailors, and airmen face every day, but their sacrifices were no less important. So, as we say thank you to veterans today, let's not forget to thank the families who spent much of their lives without their husbands, without their wives, or fathers or mothers who were away serving their country. Any veteran here today would acknowledge that we could not have served as long nor as well without their support. So having answered for myself the who part of my question, I moved on to grapple with the why and the how. Why do we celebrate Veterans Day, and how do we thank veterans? Certainly an event like this is a great part of that answer. It's a wonderful thing, folks, when a community gathers together to pay tribute to our veterans. In fact, sometimes it's a bit overwhelming. But on behalf of the veterans here today, and those who may not be fortunate enough to be in a place where communities celebrate their service the way we do, let me say thank you to the citizens of Franklin and Macon County. Thank you for this tribute, thank you for this event, and thank you for all you do for Macon County veterans. Your Macon County veterans are very grateful, and we salute your efforts. Another way that appreciation can be shown is to simply stop a veteran sometime today and say, thank you for your service. You ought to try this if you haven't done it. A couple of things will happen. You'll feel real good about yourself, and I guarantee you the veteran will appreciate it. Give it a shot as the day goes on. But the why question was still out there. I still hadn't got my hands around why. And it just seemed to me that a celebration on one day or a pat on the back one afternoon just wasn't permanent enough for what these people out here have sacrificed. And then I discovered a poem written by Mr. William Whiting in 1860. And with Mr. Whiting's help, I'd like to share the answer that I found to the why question. The poem is simply called The Watch. For those non-military folks in the crowd, a watch is generally considered a Navy term. I apologize for being parochial, but it's generally considered a Navy term. It's that period of the day when you are performing functions necessary to run the ship and keep it safe. It's often tedious, sometimes boring, but always essential to the efficient operation of a ship, a unit, or an aircraft. Now in the Army, with my apologies to my Army friends if I get it wrong, I believe the equivalent is called standing a post. Doug Ledford, my Air Force expert over here, will tell me that it's probably the same thing for the Air Force. I don't know, but I do know this. The watch is stood every day by many servicemen and women. The watch is stood by the Air Force aviation maintenance technician working on the F-16s, by the Marine on the fence line in Guantanamo, by the soldier standing the post in South Korea at the DMZ. It's stood by the thousands of young sailors who work the flight decks on the aircraft carriers of our Navy, or by Coast Guard petty officers on the deck of a cutter, or by merchant marinemen who stand the watch in the bitter cold and the nasty weather of the North Atlantic to deliver much needed supplies where they need to go. Yes, the watch is even stood by a lonely 20-year-old machinist on the USS Key West, sweating and listening to the drone of the turbines in the engine room for 6 hours at a shot with no relief. These are our modern day heroes. They are truly America's best, and they remain the best bargain the American taxpayer will ever find to this day. For all of these wonderful folks and many more, and with my apologies to Mr. Whiting for some editing I did, I'd like to conclude my comments today with his poem, only slightly modified to fit the occasion. The poem is called The Watch. For many years, these veterans have stood the watch. While some of us were in our bunks at night, they stood the watch. While some of us were in school learning our trade, they stood the watch. Yes, even before some of us were born into this world, these veterans stood the watch. In those years when the storm clouds of war were seen brewing on the horizon of history, these veterans stood the watch. Many times they would cast an eye ashore and see their family standing there, needing their guidance and their help, needing a hand to hold during those hard times. But these veterans still stood the watch. They stood the watch for many years. They stood the watch so that we, our families, our fellow countrymen could sleep soundly in safety each and every night, knowing that a veteran stood the watch. Now there's one more verse to the poem, and it's in that verse that I think gives us the answer to the question, how do we say thank you in a permanent way to the veterans of this country? And the last verse goes like this. Today we are here to say, shipmate, the watch stands relieved. Relieved by those you have protected and guided and led. Shipmate, you stand relieved. We have the watch. You see, that's what we veterans need and want most, to rest easy in the knowledge that the next generation has the watch. Veterans want to know that this magnificent ship that we call the United States of America, that ship that we gave so much of our time and our talent to protecting when it was our watch, we want to make sure that ship stays safe and that the efforts and sacrifices given by so many veterans through the years were not in vain. Truly, we veterans will never step back from service to our country.